Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's Liberal Democratic Party is set to secure a strong majority in election as exit polls show that LDP is expected to win 274 to 328 seats. A preliminary vote count shows the Bumjai Thai Party of Anutin, the Thai Prime Minister, making the early headway with 15.15% of eligible votes counted. They have the lead over the Progressive People's Party and the former ruling party Pheu Thai. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has condemned anti-Olympics protesters as enemies of Italy after violence erupted in Milan and sabotage attacks hit the national rail network on the first full day of Milan Cortina Winter Olympic Games, prompting the International Olympic Committee to say violence has no place at the Games. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni and Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan held bilateral talks in Dar es Salaam to boost cooperation, highlighting the $5 billion East African crude oil pipeline project set to start exporting oil in July. As this meeting marks Museveni's first foreign visit since winning a seventh term. Iran describes Oman-mediated indirect talks with the U.S. as a positive step towards nuclear negotiations, while emphasizing that it's a non-negotiable that talks will remain not on its missile program. The files released last month by the U.S. Justice Department show UBS continued moving money for Maxwell. Swiss banking giant UBS opened accounts for Ghislaine Maxwell in 2014 and helped manage up to $19 million for her, even after JP Morgan Chase flagged her as a high-risk client in 2011 and cut ties with Jeffrey Epstein. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says the U.S. wants the war with Russia to end by June, adding both sides had been invited to the U.S. for talks next week in Miami. Ukraine has confirmed their attendance, but Russia is yet to agree. A white supremacist who killed 51 Muslim worshippers in the 2019 mosque attacks in New Zealand, Brenton Tarrant, will begin an appeal hearing today. Tarrant, an Australian national convicted of 51 murders, 40 attempted murders and a terrorism charge after live streaming the attacks, carried out New Zealand's worst massacre in recent history. Now for this hour, we start with UK. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney has resigned amid mounting pressure over the controversial appointment of Lord Peter Mandelson as UK ambassador to the US. McSweeney, widely regarded as the architect of Labour's 2024 election landslide, took full responsibility for advising the Prime Minister on Mandelson's posting, despite files revealing Mandelson's links to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. In a statement, McSweeney called the decision wrong and said it had damaged the party, the country, and public trust in politics. He stressed the need to overhaul vetting processes and emphasized his continued support for the Prime Minister. Starmer has praised McSweeney for his dedication, crediting him with transforming Labour and delivering a historic election victory. Now for this, we welcome Mr. Dan Perry. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, thank you. Now, looking at this, do you think that this is enough for Mr. McSweeney to resign, for British Prime Minister's party to uphold the popularity or to keep the public trust?
Well, the question is whether they can keep the public trust sufficiently for Starmer not to face a massive rebellion from his backbenchers and various MPs, yes. And I'm not sure the answer is yes. McSweeney looks very much like a fall guy here. Yeah, he made the recommendation. Sure, I guess he was a crony of Mandelson. Interestingly, uh, uh, Starmer is falling victim to a version of cronyism, even though he wasn't particularly Mandelson's friend himself. So sure, he was led astray by his senior advisor. Will it be enough for the senior advisor to take the fall? I suspect in the public's eyes, not really. In particular because Starmer sold himself as a prime minister who may not be the world's biggest charmer, may not be amusing the way Boris Johnson was, but at least isn't corrupt and at least isn't ridiculous. And what's proceeded to happen is that over the past year and a half, he's led an administration that has been embroiled in a series of tragicomic expense scandals and now this overpowering disgrace, while steadily losing support for a number of reasons. One is they don't seem to have too many policies that will stimulate growth in the UK, and they've very much offended the middle class with a series of tax initiatives that are incredibly unpopular. Meanwhile, Labour has failed to take much action to prevent the splintering of the centre-left part of British politics. So not only their classic opposition from the Liberal Democrats, but also now they face massive uprising represented in the party called the Greens. There's also their far left under Jeremy Corbyn that threatens to split. So in Britain's first past the post system, such splits that create a series of middle parties and no big party are very much punished by the electorate, which will lead to a landslide for the right if they should unite, but more likely will lead to utter chaos because the system is meant for two large parties, not for a whole bunch of medium parties. So there's a lot of unhappiness in Labour with Starmer. And I think disgraceful, though the Mandelson scandal is, and it is excruciatingly disgraceful, it is a force multiplier for the bigger problem for Starmer, which is that it's not looking like he's leading the country particularly well and leading Labour to anything but lame duck status towards the next election, which is figures off to be sure, but they're looking really bad. So I have to say, smart money would be on some maneuver to see Starmer pushed out, even by the summer, unless somehow he comes up with a plan. And I can see the contours of a plan, by the way, because there's the meta issue in British politics is what to do about Brexit. And the only growth-oriented plan that I've heard in the past year coming out of Britain would be a return to the common market and maybe even the beginnings of an undoing of Brexit and a return to the European Union. 60%
Yes.
of the people in Britain regret Brexit, and if Starmer somehow taps into that,
So,
maybe he
Mr.
can save himself.
Mr. Perry, so now that Keir Starmer was he gained his position, claiming that he's clean or not involved in this many scandals, but it's well, we can't say that anymore. So who do you think he will appoint in replacement of McSweeney, and what strategy does Prime Minister Keir Starmer need to make to keep his position?
I'm sure he'll appoint someone who is seen as squeaky clean and who is also seen at the same time, and it seems like perhaps a contradiction, as someone who can sort of crack the whip more effectively within a Labour Party, because he's facing, it's possible, like not dissolution, but he's facing divisions everywhere and a possible rebellion in his caucus in Parliament. So I think it'll have to be someone who's both strong but also clean, conceivably, because he faces a potential challenge from Wes Streeting, one of his cabinet ministers. I suppose there could be some olive branch to that branch of the party and appoint someone who's acceptable to both. Although interestingly, Streeting is more of a crony of Mandelson than Starmer himself was. So, I mean, it's sort of a fiasco in the Labour Party. And if you ask me what he can do to keep his job, my own advice to him would be what I started to say before, which is to tap into the dissatisfaction with the results of Brexit, which have led to great economic stagnation in Britain and no growth, and if anything, greater immigration, just not from Europe, from the developing world, which is certainly not what the Brexit voters wanted. So I think some maneuver to tap the dissatisfaction about Brexit and turn the Labour Party into the let's fix the damage of Brexit party. If he does that, that would be courageous because it's unpredictable where that would go, but it would change the discussion. And right now, the discussion is that he's incompetent and his government is bafflingly somewhat corrupt and immoral.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, in an interview, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has discussed the indirect negotiations between Iran and the United States, noting that a handshake occurred as a diplomatic courtesy despite the talks being separate. Araghchi explained that such exchanges had happened before, emphasizing that negotiations remain distinct from personal gestures. Regarding potential conflict, he made it clear that while Iran cannot target U.S. soil, let's listen in.
ما هر بار که با هم مذاکرات داشتیم به صورت غیر مستقیم، ولی فرصتی برای یک به اصطلاح شیک هند و یک دست دادن و این هم همیشه پیش می آمد. این از باب نزاکت دیپلماتیک هست و بارها دفعات قبلی هم انجام شده، این بار هم انجام شد. ما به هر حال به عنوان دو هیئت با هم دیگه دیدار میکنیم، خوشوبش میکنیم، صحبت میکنیم و بعد در اتاقهای جداگانه مذاکره میکنیم. مذاکره با یک گفتگوی نزاکتی فرق میکنه. به نظر من این خیلی روشنه. اگر آمریکا به ما حمله بکنه، طبیعی است که ما امکان حمله به خاک اصلی آمریکا رو نداریم. ناچارن به پایگاه‌های آمریکا در منطقه حمله خواهیم کرد یا پاسخ خواهیم داد. و متاسفانه پایگاه‌های آمریکا در سراسر منطقه وجود داره و پخش هست. بنابراین اگر آمریکا حمله بکنه، پاسخ ما ناچارن.
Separately, Iran's Majlis is set to hold a meeting on February 9th to review the interim results of the first round of talks with the United States regarding Iran's nuclear program. Abbas Moqtadi, Deputy Chairman of the National Security Committee, confirmed that the closed-door meeting will include discussions on the ongoing negotiations, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi expected to attend. Now we welcome back Mr. Dan Perry. He's joining us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you, Mr. Perry, for staying with us. Now, how should we interpret these mixed signals? Are we seeing genuine diplomatic progress or a familiar pattern where dialogue and pressure are being pursued in parallel?
We should interpret them with great humility and, as always, pretty much ignore anything said in public during the negotiation, and also not read too much into this childish business of whether they had a handshake or not. You're looking here at a classic situation where there's a whole mountain of demands made of Iran, and they're going to try to resist all of them if they can. And the question becomes, can there be a meeting of the minds, not the hands, where Iran's maximal concession meets the West's minimal demand? I think there's a strong current of thought in the West that says that Iran must not be allowed to enrich beyond the civilian level, must not be allowed to develop its ballistic missiles, and must be made to forswear any further support for these jihadist militias all over the region, which have truly been an outrage for about 30 years. It's hard to believe that it was tolerated. So Iran wants this to be only about nuclear, and they say that they will not agree to have no enrichment. And the one place I can really see there being potential give on the American side is that Trump has been insisting that they not enrich anything. Now, they're a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have the right to enrich to a civilian level. The problem is no one believes the Iranian regime. And so if they say they're enriching 5%, everyone's sure they're really enriching 80%. And they think they're hiding stuff from the inspectors. So Trump wants nothing. But I could see where there's an agreement to allow them to enrich to purely civilian levels, and that really means 5%. And Trump will say that this time the verification is real and not, the way it was under the Obama deal, which will probably be nonsense, but he'll claim it. And maybe that will enable everyone to declare victory. I think, though, that it's going to be hard because everything about this negotiation has this bad smell, given that Trump encouraged the Iranians to protest. and to take over their institutions. And many thousands were killed. And that was not about a better nuclear deal. That was about getting rid of the regime that is oppressive to them and toxic to the region. And if Trump then, suffices with a deal on nuclear enrichment, not even ballistic missiles, and not even mentioning anything about the militias, he's going to look very weak. With Trump, you never know. You can't predict what one guy who's this strange is going to decide. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they're somewhat bluffing and if they've decided to attack, given the tremendously considerable armada that has arrived in the region. The Iranians' insistence on dictating terms, I mean, it might be great negotiation, but it could also be very, very reckless. And I would also add that if the ballistic missile threat is not addressed, I think Israel may end up acting on its own to the degree that they can get permission from the US, but they may really push hard in that direction.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Dan Perry for sharing that analysis with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has announced that drone production will begin in Germany in mid-February, with the UK also set to operate drone manufacturing lines. Zelenskyy made the announcement during a meeting at the Kyiv Aviation Institute, which was held to mark the 120th birth anniversary of aircraft designer Oleg Antonov. By 2026, Ukraine plans to have 10 export centers operating across Europe, including in the Baltic and Northern European countries. Moreover, Zelenskyy has also stated that Ukraine has 450 companies engaged in drone manufacturing, with 40 to 50 of them being leaders in the field. The Ukrainian president has stressed the significance of drones in European security, noting the growing role of Ukrainian technologies in the global market, particularly in the defense sector. Now we welcome Ms. Alison Lutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Ms. Alison, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, thank you. Now, looking at this news, I can't help but think: are these developments happening because the war is going to be continuing? What are we to make of this?
Well, I think this has been the first modern-day war fought with drones. Both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, have made massive use of drones in this war. And the Russians themselves have used drones in NATO countries, have strayed into violated NATO borders. So I think this is the way of the future, and I think your assessment is right. I think there is no sign of the war stopping right now, and Ukraine needs to beef up its supply of drones. It needs a steady, good supply of drones. It can't just work at the last minute, oh, we've run out. They need to stockpile them. And so it's found partners in Europe where they can be made. I think Germany, you mentioned the Baltic states, also the United Kingdom. So I think this is a way forward, but it also shows, even should we come to a peace agreement, Ukraine is not confident that Russia will not attack again. So I think Ukraine wants to ensure it has a good supply of drones, and that it has partnerships, deals, agreements with companies in Europe who will continue to supply them. And I think it's a sign for the future, not just on Ukraine's side, but also on the European side, that should Russia aggression move beyond Ukraine, drones are what is needed. We've seen this where I live in Romania. You've seen these are border states with Ukraine. You've seen it in Poland as well, that drones are needed to take down drones, and it's much easier to do that and much cheaper than to fly a jet, to scramble a jet, which is excessively expensive and a lot of effort and resources required. So drones are the way of the future, and I think this does show that there is uncertainty that this conflict is about to end anytime soon.
Right. So do you think, since we have already entered fourth year, unfortunately, and it seems like the peace talks are moving, but very slowly, Do you think Ukraine is changing their strategy to including what they have gained through this warfare into business now?
Yes, it does seem so. I mean, I remember last year when Donald Trump decided not to give Ukraine Patriot missiles. Ukraine itself went and started manufacturing similar missiles. And so Ukraine realizes it does need to have a good arsenal of weapons, not just for this war, which, as you say, shows no signs of stopping, although we hear some agreement has been reached, but there's also sticking points over territory, which the two sides cannot come to agreement over. So Ukraine is taking a practical view of this and is manufacturing weapons both at home and also striking agreements, commercial agreements, with companies abroad, particularly in Europe, to produce drones. But also, it should be noted, last year when the United States did not give Ukraine Patriot missiles, Ukraine started making their own, started manufacturing their own.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And, you know, right now, how do you analyze what cards does Ukraine has left to play in terms of, peace or, bringing Russia to the table and making Russia agree to its terms? Since today we also saw Ukrainian foreign minister say that there's only one person who can bring peace, it's Trump. So do you think, what cards does Ukraine still have left to play here?
Well, I think the Ukrainian foreign minister might have said that Trump is the only person who could bring peace, and he's probably being diplomatic. He may be able to be the only person who could bring peace. I think it would be Vladimir Putin to stop the invasion, but that's not going to happen. What cards? The main card that Ukraine can play, which it has played so far, is not to give in, is not to surrender to Russia's maximalist demands. By now, it would have been expected that Ukraine, which is not a major power, that is fighting this terrible war, which is has been going on for 4 years, would have given in. They said it's too bloody, it's costing us too much, it's too disruptive, it's just it's destroying our nation. But the Ukrainians have shown that they are resilient, that they are valiant, and they will not surrender. There are some issues, for example, NATO membership, which was never really on the cards, but an invitation was given that Ukraine may compromise on that. What they have said they won't compromise is on territory. So I think the only cards they have to play is okay, they will compromise on some issues, but they are standing firm on territory and they won't give in, even if Trump wishes they would the next second. So I think, and the fact that they have a very good army, a very valiant army, the population so far has stood behind Ukraine's effort. Plus, they need the other card, their allies in Europe. That's Germany, France, Britain, Poland, other countries. If those countries say they support Ukraine against Russian aggression, that is a big card for Ukraine to play, because, as I said, it's not a major player in the world like Russia is, so they do need all the support they can get. They can no longer rely on America the same way they could under Joe Biden. So they need their European allies, but they also need their own dogged determination and resistance, which they have shown so far.
Yes. With that, I'd like to thank Ms. Mutler for joining us and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. Voters in Portugal have headed to the polls today for the second round of the country's presidential election. Although extreme weather conditions have impacted the turnout, severe storms and flooding, which have caused deaths and displacement across the country, led to the postponement of voting in some areas. Around 37,000 voters, or about 0.3% of the electorate, will vote later next week after 3 municipal councils in southern and central Portugal were affected. In the run-off, center-left candidate Antonio José Seguro faces off against far-right leader André Ventura. While Seguro has been seen as the front-runner, The storm's impact and possible low turnout could benefit Ventura as well, who has a loyal support base. Ventura has been pushing for a delay in the election, while the government has insisted that the vote must proceed, calling it a demonstration of democracy despite the calamity. With around 22% of the eligible voters casting their ballots as of noon, both candidates remain focused on securing the presidency, which holds significant political power in Portugal. Now we move on to our next news. Pope Leo has strongly condemned human trafficking as a crime against humanity. In his message for the 12th World Day Against Human Trafficking, the Pope renewed the Church's call to confront and end this grave injustice, highlighting the growing issue of cyber slavery and the exploitation of women and children in armed conflicts. Meanwhile, he called for prayer and awareness to resist injustice and combat trafficking, urging Christians to adopt a renewed vision of love and dignity for all people. Furthermore, the Pope expressed gratitude to those working to assist victims of human trafficking. Let's listen in.
Si celebra la giornata mondiale di preghiera e riflessione contro la tratta di persone. Ringrazio le religiose e tutti coloro che si impegnano per contrastare ed eliminare le attuali forme di schiavitù. Insieme a loro dico, la pace comincia con la dignità.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.